You almost miss it. That is the first thing to understand. Not because it happens quickly, though it does. Not because it happens quietly, though it does that too. You almost miss it because nothing about the moment announces itself as significant. There is no crowd gathering. There is no fanfare. There is no sign posted at the edge of Horse Guard's parade telling you that what you are about to witness has been happening in this exact spot, in this exact form, for just over 300 years. You are standing on Whitehall on an ordinary evening. The tourists have thinned. The coaches have pulled away. The light is doing that particular London thing where it does not quite leave, where it hangs in the air above the rooftops in a gray-gold suspension that makes the city look like a painting of itself. And in the archway of Horse Guards, beneath those two stone figures on horseback that nobody ever quite looks at properly, two soldiers are meeting. One is already there. He has been there for 2 hours. He is standing in a posture that does not look trained so much as geological, still in the way that old buildings are still, present in the way that things are present when they have been in a place so long that the place has shaped itself around them. His uniform is immaculate. His boots catch what remains of the evening light. His face is forward, his shoulders set, and he is looking at something that is not there, or perhaps at something that only he can see. The second soldier approaches from the direction of the barracks. His pace is not hurried. It is not casual either. It is something in between, a pace that has a name inside the regiment even if it does not have one in any dictionary you have ever read. He stops. They are face to face now and something happens. It takes less than 2 minutes. There are words, though you cannot hear them from where you are standing. There is a movement, a transfer of something, though you cannot see what. And then the first soldier walks away, and the second soldier takes his place in the archway, and the stillness closes around him like water closing over a stone, and it is as if the first soldier was never there at all. You take your photograph. You think, very British. You think, I wonder how long he has to stand there. You think, if you are being particularly honest with yourself, that you are a little cold and that there is a pub on the corner that looked promising when you walked past it an hour ago. What you do not think, because nobody has told you, because there is no explanatory panel, because this is one of those things that London simply knows about itself and has long since stopped feeling any need to announce, is that you just watched a transfer of something that has no physical form. Something that cannot be held in the hand, or logged in a register, or photographed from the pavement on a cooling Tuesday evening. What you watched was the handing over of the dark. And the soldier who just received it is now the most specifically prepared individual in the entire city for what that means. Start with what the handover looks like when you do not know what it is. You see 2 soldiers. You see a brief exchange. You register the precision of it, the economy of movement, the absence of anything wasted or informal. You note, if you are paying attention, that the soldier arriving does not simply step into the space the departing soldier vacates. There is an overlap, a deliberate moment where both men occupy the same post simultaneously, where the outgoing sentry is still present, and the incoming sentry is already assuming the weight of the position. Then one leaves and one stays, and that, you think, is that. What you have filed away in your mind is something like guard change, ceremonial, very precise, probably quite dull for the men involved. You have categorized it alongside the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace, alongside trooping the color, alongside all the other things that London does with great formality that seem to exist primarily for the benefit of people holding cameras. This is the assumption that the story is here to dismantle. Because what you watched was not one soldier replacing another. What you watched was one soldier receiving from another a weight of responsibility so specific, so historically loaded, so operationally precise even now in a century when cavalry charges are the subject of museum exhibits rather than battlefield orders, that the regiment has a word for the state the night sentry enters when the handover is complete. The word, used inside the regiment among the men who have stood the post themselves, is simply carrying. The night sentry is carrying. Not standing, not posted, carrying. And the thing he carries has a history longer than most nations currently sitting on the map of the world. To understand the carrying, you need to understand what the night once was. Not the night as it exists now, with its street lamps and its CCTV and its metropolitan police units, and its entire layered architecture of urban security that makes central London at 2 in the morning considerably safer than central London at 2 in the morning in, say, 1670. The night as it existed then. The night as the men who built this ritual understood it, lived inside it, and in some cases did not survive it. The Horse Guards building, the archway you walk through without looking up, the parade ground behind it that tourists cross daily without knowing its name, sits at the precise geographic point where the sovereign's most sensitive administrative functions were housed. This was not incidental. This was the center of it. The place where the monarch's military command operated, where orders originated, where the machinery of state, in the era when state and monarch were largely synonymous, actually functioned. And in 1660, when Charles II came back to England and the monarchy was restored after 11 years of Commonwealth rule, one of his first operational decisions, buried beneath the more celebrated acts of restoration, was to establish a permanent mounted presence at this location that would not simply be visible during the day. The day, after all, was manageable. The day had people in it. The day had witnesses. The day had the ambient security of public life, of commerce and movement, and the thousand small deterrents that crowds provide simply by existing. The night had none of that. The night had darkness in a city where darkness meant something genuinely different from what it means now. A city without gas lamps, without electricity, without any of the infrastructure that makes modern darkness merely an inconvenience rather than a condition. A city where the archway at Horse Guards, unlit and unguarded, represented a specific and serious vulnerability in the ring of protection around the sovereign's operational center. So a soldier was posted there through the night, not as ceremony, as necessity. And the standards applied to that soldier, the qualities required of the man chosen to stand in the dark at the place where the king's business was conducted, were not the same standards applied to the men who stood there in daylight. The day sentry needed presence, bearing, visibility, the qualities that communicate authority to people who can see you and register what they are seeing. The night sentry needed something else entirely. He needed to be comfortable in a darkness that most men were not comfortable in. He needed to be alert in conditions where alertness had no external stimulation to support it, where there was nothing to watch and nothing to respond to, and nothing to do but remain present and ready in a silence that could last for hours without interruption. He needed to be the kind of man who did not reach for distraction, who did not create noise to fill the quiet, who could stand in the cold and the dark on a post that the city had forgotten about for the night, and know with absolute certainty that the forgetting did not make the post less important. It made it more important. Because the thing about a post that nobody is watching is that the only reason it holds is the character of the man standing it. This is where the ritual comes from. This is what the handover is actually transferring. Not a location, not a set of physical coordinates on Whitehall. The handover is the transfer of that understanding, that standard, that specific knowledge of what it means to carry something when no one is watching and the night is long and the cold is real and the pageantry has gone home. Here is something that changes the way you look at the handover the moment you learn it. The words exchanged between the outgoing and incoming sentry are not improvised. They are not a casual briefing, a quick summary of the evening's events, a friendly handoff between colleagues. They follow a form, a specific, prescribed, centuries-old form that has not been materially altered since the reign of George II in the mid-18th century, when the regiment codified what had previously been transmitted through practice and example into something that could be formally taught and formally verified. The form covers three things. The first is the state of the post. Not whether anything has happened, though that is included, but the specific condition of the location at the moment of transfer. Temperature, visibility, any changes to the environment since the last handover. This sounds bureaucratic until you understand what it was designed for. In an era before telecommunications, before any mechanism for passing information from a post to a command center and back again in real time, the outgoing sentry's verbal report to his replacement was the only continuous thread of situational awareness that connected what happened at this location through the night to what the command would know in the morning. Every handover preserved that thread. Every handover added to it. The night, in this sense, was not a gap in the record. It was a chain of individual men, standing in the dark, passing the chain to the next man, keeping it unbroken until the morning came, and the chain could be read by those responsible for acting on it. The second thing covered in the handover form is the authority. The incoming sentry is told, in specific language, what he holds, what he is authorized to do in the scenarios the regiment considers possible at this post, and what he is not authorized to do. This transfer of authority is not a formality. In the operational logic of the regiment, as it existed in the 17th and 18th centuries, a sentry who acted without clear authority, who made decisions that fell outside the explicit scope of what he had been told he could decide, created legal and military liability that the regiment took extremely seriously. The handover form resolved that liability in advance. It told the incoming man exactly where his authority began and where it ended. It put the responsibility in his hands with the precision of a document, using words rather than paper, using memory rather than ink, because neither paper nor ink was practical in the conditions these men were working in. The third thing, and this is the one that surprises people most consistently when they learn it, is the acknowledgement. The incoming sentry does not simply receive the briefing. He does not nod, take his position, and allow the outgoing man to leave. He speaks. He confirms in the prescribed language that he has received what has been given, that he understands what he is carrying, and that he accepts it. Not that he will try to carry it, not that he will do his best, that he accepts it. The distinction is not semantic. Inside the regiment, among the men who have stood this post and the officers who have overseen it, the distinction between trying and accepting is understood to be the whole point. A man who is trying to do something is still in negotiation with the difficulty of the thing. A man who has accepted something has ended the negotiation. The difficulty is real, and he knows it is real, and he is carrying it anyway. And the carrying does not depend on the conditions being favorable, or the night being short, or anyone coming to check on him in the hours between the handover and the dawn. The acceptance is the handover. Everything else is procedure. Now comes the part of the story that requires you to do something slightly uncomfortable. It requires you to try to imagine 2 hours of genuine stillness. Not the stillness of sitting quietly in a room you are comfortable in. Not the stillness of a long journey with headphones in, and the window showing you something worth looking at. The stillness of standing at a post in central London, in all weather, in all seasons, for 2 unbroken hours, in a posture that is held to a standard of precision that means you cannot shift your weight in ways that are visible from the street, cannot adjust your expression in ways that break the bearing you are required to maintain, cannot reach for any of the small physical negotiations with discomfort that most people perform dozens of times an hour without noticing they are doing it. The soldiers who have stood this post will describe the experience differently depending on who is asking and how much trust exists in the conversation. To journalists and tourists and members of the public who ask with genuine curiosity, they tend to describe it in terms of focus. The post requires focus. You are concentrating. You are present. They are not wrong, but they are also not complete. To each other, in the particular frankness of people who have shared an experience that cannot be fully explained to those who have not had it, they describe something more interesting. They describe the post as a relationship, not with the location, not with the uniform, not with the institution, though all of those things are present. A relationship with time, with the specific quality of time that exists when you cannot mark it by movement or conversation or the small punctuations of ordinary life. A soldier named James Hartley, who stood this post for 3 years before moving to a training role inside the regiment, described it once to a fellow soldier in terms that have been passed around among the men who have stood it since. He said that the first 20 minutes of any posting were the hardest because you were still fighting the post. You were still the person you were before you stepped into the archway, with your thoughts and your plans and the conversation you had at dinner and the letter you meant to write and the discomfort in your left shoulder that has been there since Thursday. You were still a person with a biography, and the post did not want your biography. The post wanted only the part of you that could stand. He said the next 20 minutes were the negotiation. The part of you that was still fighting the post gradually ran out of the energy required to fight it. Not because you forced it to stop, because fighting required fuel and the post gave you no fuel, and eventually the fighting simply became too expensive to continue. He said that somewhere around the 40-minute mark, if the night was going well, something shifted. The shift was not dramatic. It did not feel like a revelation or a relief or a release of tension. It felt, he said, like setting something down. Like you had been carrying something in your arms without realizing you were carrying it, and then suddenly your arms were empty, and what you noticed was not the absence of the thing, but the return of a kind of clarity that the carrying had been preventing. He said that the hour and 20 minutes that followed the shift were the reason men who had stood this post tended to be different in a way that other men in the regiment noticed but could not always name. Not quieter, not more serious, not more disciplined necessarily. Different in the specific way that people who have spent real time with something larger than themselves tend to be different. More settled, more capable of sitting inside difficulty without immediately trying to escape it. He said he had never found a word for what was set down at the 40-minute mark. He had looked for one. He had asked other men who had stood the post whether they had found one. None of them had. The regiment had not found one either. In 300 years of men standing in the dark at this archway, and coming out the other side of it changed in ways they could feel but not quite name. Perhaps the word does not exist because the thing it would describe is not a concept. It is an experience, and experiences of that particular depth do not reduce to language without losing most of what made them what they were. The names matter here in a way that is different from the horse-nomming tradition of the household cavalry, but matters just as much, and for reasons that go just as deep. Inside the regiment, the soldiers who have stood the night post are known informally by a designation that does not appear in any official document, does not feature in any rank structure, and carries no formal authority of any kind. They are called, simply, the men who have stood the dark. Not the night post, not the evening duty, the dark. The designation is specific and the specificity is intentional. Standing the dark is not the same as standing the night post in terms of what the regiment understands those words to mean. Standing the night post is a duty assignment. It happens on a rota. It is carried out by soldiers at a particular point in their service career, after a particular level of training has been completed, and a particular level of readiness has been assessed and confirmed. Standing the dark is what happens inside that assignment. It is the internal experience, the relationship with the post that James Hartley described, and that every man who has stood it recognizes when they hear his description of it. It is the thing that cannot be assigned on a rota because it cannot be scheduled. It either happens or it does not, and whether it happens depends on the man, and whether the man is ready to let it happen, and whether the night gives him the conditions in which the letting can occur. A soldier named Marcus Webb, who served in the regiment for 11 years and stood the night post on 14 separate occasions, said in a conversation with his troop commander that he believed some men stood the night post many times without ever standing the dark. Not because they were poor soldiers, not because they lacked the discipline or the bearing or the commitment. Because standing the dark required a specific kind of surrender that not every man was willing to make, and the regiment could not teach the willingness. It could only create the conditions in which the willingness, if it was there, could emerge. His troop commander, a man named Richard Calloway who had stood the post himself, and who understood exactly what Webb was saying, wrote in a personal letter that he kept but never sent that he thought the regiment knew this about itself. That the ritual of the handover, the specific prescribed language of the acceptance, the word carries rather than stands to describe what the night sentry does, were all the regiment's way of pointing toward the thing it could not directly teach. Pointing toward it and trusting that the men who were ready to find it would find it, and that the men who were not would still stand the post with honor and would perhaps find it on a later posting when something in them had shifted enough to allow it. He wrote that he thought this was the most honest thing the regiment did, more honest than any ceremony, any pageant, any formal statement of values or institutional identity. The honesty of a 300-year-old tradition that knew the difference between what it could prescribe and what it could only offer, and had the discipline to offer it consistently, generation after generation, without ever pretending the offering was a guarantee. When a soldier completes his final night posting before leaving the regiment, there is a moment that is not in any manual, not prescribed by any standing order, not part of the official handover form, but that happens consistently enough that the men who have experienced it and the men who have witnessed it treat it as part of the tradition, even without any formal acknowledgement that it exists. The outgoing sentry, on his final night post, as the incoming sentry completes the acceptance and the handover is technically concluded, pauses before he walks away. The pause is brief. It does not involve any additional words, any gesture that would be legible to an observer on the pavement, any deviation from the bearing that the post demands right up until the moment the post releases you. It is simply a pause, a moment of remaining, one beat longer than the protocol requires, at the place where he has stood the dark for the last time. The men who have experienced it describe it differently. Some say it is involuntary, a physical hesitation that the body makes without consulting the mind. Some say it is deliberate, a private acknowledgement that they owe the post something and that the pause is the payment. Some say they are not sure what it is, but that it felt necessary in the same way that certain things feel necessary without being explicable. The way you turn back to look at a room you are leaving for the last time, even when there is nothing in the room you have forgotten. A soldier named Daniel Forsyth, who served for 16 years and stood the night post on 22 occasions, the highest number recorded in the regiment's internal history in the modern era, said that on his final posting he stood in that pause and felt something he had never felt at the post before. He said he felt recognized, not by a person, not by the institution, not by anyone watching from the pavement, recognized by the place itself, by the archway and the stone, and the particular quality of dark that existed in that specific location on that specific night. He said he knew as he said it that it sounded like the kind of thing a man says when he does not quite have the language for what he is trying to describe. He said he thought that was probably accurate. He said he had been looking for a better way to say it for several years and had not found one. And at a certain point, you either say the imperfect thing or you say nothing. And he had decided the imperfect thing was closer to true than the nothing. When he finally walked away from the post on that last night, he did not look back. That, he said, was also part of it. You paused, and then you left cleanly because the post did not belong to you and you had always known it did not belong to you. What you had carried in trust. You were returning it now. And the incoming soldier standing in the archway behind you, settling into his own first 20 minutes of fighting the post before the negotiation and the shift and the setting down, was receiving it in the same trust that you had received it from the man who stood before you. The chain was intact. Your part of it was done. Here is what you now know that you did not know when you started reading. You know that the handover at Horse Guards is not a security procedure dressed in ceremonial clothing. It is a ceremonial form that preserved, across 3 centuries of institutional change, the operational logic of a genuinely dangerous post in a genuinely dangerous city, at a time when the king's safety depended in part on the quality of the man standing in the dark, outside his administrative center. You know that the words exchanged in the handover follow a form established in the reign of George II that covers 3 things: the state of the post, the transfer of authority, and the acceptance. And you know that the acceptance is not a formality. It is the whole point. It is the moment when the incoming soldier stops being a man who will try to carry something and becomes a man who has accepted that he is carrying it. You know that inside the regiment, the soldiers who have stood this post are called the men who have stood the dark, and that the dark is understood to be different from the night, and that the difference is interior rather than external, and that it cannot be scheduled or assigned or guaranteed by any amount of training, only offered consistently through the form of the ritual itself. You know about James Hartley and the 40-minute shift, and the thing that gets set down, and the fact that in 300 years, no one inside the regiment has found a word for what that thing is. You know about Marcus Webb and the difference between standing the night post and standing the dark, and the soldiers who stand the post many times without ever standing the dark, and the regiment's honesty about the limits of what it can teach. You know about Richard Calloway and the unsent letter and his belief that the handover ritual, with its specific prescribed language and its centuries of unchanged form, was the regiment's most honest act, its way of pointing at something it could not directly give. You know about Daniel Forsyth and the 22 postings and the final pause, and the feeling of being recognized not by a person but by a place, and his decision to say the imperfect thing rather than the nothing because the imperfect thing was closer to true. And you know about the moment when he walked away cleanly without looking back, because the post had never belonged to him, and the chain was intact, and his part of it was done. Now here is the question worth sitting with, not the historical question, not the military question, the human one. You think the people who walk past horse guards in the evening and stop to photograph the handover understand any of this? Do you think the tourist with the camera, the office worker cutting through on the way to the tube, the couple who pause for 30 seconds because something about the precision of it caught their attention and then move on toward dinner, do you think they know about the acceptance, about the carrying, about the 40-minute shift and the thing that gets set down and the unsent letter and the final pause? Most of them do not, and this is not a criticism. It is simply the condition of a living tradition that operates in plain sight without ever explaining itself. The regiment does not stop on Whitehall to tell passers-by what the handover means. It does not post a sign describing the 3 elements of the prescribed form, or the internal distinction between standing the night post and standing the dark. It does not publish the designation of the men who have stood it, or explain what Richard Calloway meant when he wrote that the handover was the regiment's most honest act. It simply does the handover, in the form it has always done it, with the precision it has always required, in the language that has not been materially altered since the mid-18th century, in all weather, in all seasons, on ordinary Tuesday evenings when the tourists have thinned and the coaches have pulled away, and the light is doing that particular London thing above the rooftops. It does this because the doing is the point, not the observing of it, not the photographing of it, not the explaining of it to people who happen to be walking past at the right moment. The doing. Because what the ritual preserves cannot be preserved in any other way. It cannot be written into a document and kept in an archive. It cannot be explained in a lecture or demonstrated in a training exercise. It lives only in the doing, in the specific prescribed act of one man handing to another a weight that has no physical form, and the other man using the specific prescribed word to say that he has received it, and understands it, and accepts it. The word carries rather than stands. That is the whole institution's understanding of itself expressed in a single verb. The soldier at the archway is not occupying a position. He is carrying something, And the thing he is carrying is not a duty or a posting or a set of security responsibilities that will be logged in the morning when the chain of handovers is complete. He is carrying 300 years of men who stood in the dark when the city forgot about them and held the post anyway. He is carrying the understanding that the things nobody is watching are sometimes the things that matter most. He is carrying the knowledge, the specific and earned knowledge that comes only from the 40-minute shift and the setting down, that there is a kind of clarity available to human beings that ordinary life does not offer, and that can only be reached through the particular discipline of remaining present in conditions that provide no incentive for presence. He is carrying all of that, in the archway, in the dark, while the city moves around him and the light fails and the hours pass, and no one coming from the direction of the tube or the promising pub on the corner has any idea what they are walking past. So next time you find yourself on Whitehall in the evening, next time you see two soldiers meet in the archway with that particular economy of movement, that absence of anything wasted or informal, next time you see the words exchanged, and the transfer made and the outgoing sentry walk away, and the incoming sentry settle into the stillness that closes around him like water closing over a stone. Watch for the acceptance. You will not hear the word. You are too far away, and the word is not meant for you anyway. It is meant for the post, and for the man receiving it, and for the 300 years of men before him who used the same word in the same form in the same archway and then stood in the dark, and carried what they had accepted until the dawn came, and the chain could be passed forward. But if you know to look for it, you will see the moment when it happens. The slight change in the incoming soldier's bearing, not more rigid, not more dramatic, but more settled, more final, the posture of a man who has stopped arriving and started carrying. The ceremony is not decoration. The ceremony is the memory. And the memory is standing in the archway right now, chest out, eyes forward, carrying something that has no physical form and no word in any language that anyone has yet found, in a city that has been changing around it continuously since 1660, on an ordinary evening that most people walking past will forget before they reach the end of the street. The soldier in the archway will not forget it. He is carrying it. That is not ceremony. That is something considerably rarer. That is a man who knows exactly what he holds and holds it anyway in the dark, while the city sleeps around him and the chain remains unbroken and the dawn is still hours away. Gray on the left, black on the right at Horse Guards. And in the archway, in the dark, the soldier who has accepted the carrying. Still there, still carrying, as he always has been, as he always will be.